Welcome back. My name is Wahid and I'm back with the part 2 of the demo of the Simpli5 framework tools. The last time we talked about the scoping accelerator or the scoping tool that we have developed. That use case was where an architect is in front of a customer trying to scope or discover the scope of potential implementation project. Typically, the contract is not signed yet, and the customer is trying to identify the fitment of some standard content that we may have, let's say in form of model companies, in some pre-configured content, and we're trying to find out the fitment of that to certain process requirements of the customer. This tool that we're going to present today will be focusing on the use case where the contract is signed and the project team, primarily the consultants, are in the delivery phase of the project. This is going to be a slightly longish demo because there are lots of really cool features that have been developed to make the consultant's life really easy in terms of managing the entire end-to-end delivery. Before we go to the actual delivery tool, there's one feature of the scoping tool that we did not show the last time, primarily because this is linked to the how a delivery tool really starts. If you remember, this was the scoping phase output tab or output sheet where we talked about the various outputs that it can generate or automate based on the inputs that architect has captured. We did not demonstrate one particular use case, which as it reads, delivery handover content generation. So based on any scoping information that the architect has captured, let's say the contract is signed, then traditionally we are dependent on reading the contract document, the SOWs, maybe some documents that are shared with the customer, some emails, etc., and interpret them and use that as a basis of how we start a project. And we know the lead times of projects can be quite significantly high, and not it doesn't always happen that the architect is the same or the team of architects has the same set of people who would execute the delivery also. So there needs to be handover. That's exactly what this use case is focusing on. So based on the scoping inputs, all these architects now need to do, or a project team at the start they need to do is refer the scoping phase output. Just click on what is called the generate and download uh, handover content and create what is, let us say, called an explore input. Okay, this generates a sheet in a particular form which is compatible to the delivery phase tool, right? So I hereby end the scoping accelerator or the scoping tool, and this is another worksheet or a tool Excel based for the MVP phase, which is what the delivery phase will be using. As you see, it starts from a fairly fresh um, uh, blank sheet or a canvas, as we try to call it, a blank plain canvas, right? So now when the project has been kicked off, we do not depend on interpretation of a contract. We need to initiate the delivery by uploading or importing the scoping phase inputs, right? So when I click on this, it expects a document. So let's go back to importing the same explore input, which would result in loading the base BPML that the customer had signed up on. So as you see, there is no interpretation, there is no manual activities, it's purely importing the content. I do not know if you recollect from the demo that, but we had certain new processes that were added into the buying phase, for example, as an area in which it was called a new process, and therefore it reflects exactly what was the output given in the scoping phase. So what the first obvious stage of a project would be the design or explore phase in some parlance. Click on this button. It takes me to a similar screen or fairly similar screen to how the scoping phase thing looks like. So this is pretty much the canvas that just gets painted, that just gets evolved in the delivery phase. So let's go through some of the features that are built in this delivery tool. Primary use case, a consultant sitting in front of a customer trying to design currently in the explore phase, design or enrich or validate the scope that was agreed in the scoping phase. Right. So this was the BPML, the master process master list that got loaded from the scoping phase. So each of these phases, so let's go into one of the fours. Let us say I am with the customer talking about one of the process line items, let's say called manual buying. It loads the processes from the scoping phase they were there, and each such process document or process would have details. If you see here, would refer to the details that were captured in the scoping phase and any additional details I would like to capture as part of this explore the design phase. Right. So let us use the standard ordering process in which the input that were captured in the scoping phase was the standard process should be sufficient, or whatever input I may have included in there. In the design phase, I go ahead and capture more details. For example, right? So I input some text. So typically, what this would replace any other form of information capture, like your scribble pads, notepads, etc. Let's say I am in a phase of show and tell that I've done. I can additionally add something like a process variant for the same process. One of the things I've identified or visualized is that there's a new process variant called, let's say, the buying import buying. I can go to the import buying phase and add more details for that particular variant. I am not sure if I saved previous one. I didn't. Okay. Right. And one of the features of this particular tool is that the intent is to validate the scope against what was captured in the scoping phase. So in case this consultant realizes that the customer is now asking for additional things which is not part of what the information the scoping phase has said, he could go ahead and add or record this as a change, right? So I click on this button and says new change to, let's say, document types, and he reckons it's a small change but medium now. Needs new document type for import and um, domestic output. These are the change customer request. This records a CR or change request as change recorded against it. Whether it is commercially applicable, whether it has any relevance to the schedule or cost of the project is a different story. The consultant interested in capturing the status of uh, the change to what was agreed in the scoping phase. Right, so I update and exit. As you would see now that, but so I do the same activity against every single process. One additional thing that I need to do as part of the design phase is go to a level 3 and 4 of the process, which is about capturing what is the process steps. So there are two ways. One, I can add processes from scratch, or I can load from repository. So these repositories are also populated over a period of time through experience, through basically a knowledge repository. So there is also a knowledge management tool in a way, because if I add a new process or create a new process step, I can load it back into the process repository. Anyways, for simplicity's sake, let's start with identifying, saying these are the process steps relevant for this. I load them. So each such process step would have details like this: prerequisites, the inputs, the requirements, the expected outputs, etc. Right? So all these are pre-populated based on thing, and based on the new requirements of the customer, I may add additional process steps or maybe make change to some of these. Let us say I go ahead and said this is the ability to release. It's not based on these values, but something else. Let's say $150. This is 151, etc. So I can make changes for any of these fields, which are pre-populated based on some, let's say, best practices. I update. I can, if you remember, there were some process level gaps that were captured or available in the as a process, so I can assign them to a process step. So let's say a transmit process order. The process purchase order form is relevant for that. So I go to the purchase order form, assign it to this particular step, and update it. So immediately it shows up the saying relevant gap for this process step is number 27, which is a process purchase order form. Of course, I can continue in this stage to add more processes or descope processes in this particular phase also. One of the things it does is every time I try to add a process or make any changes to the information captured in scoping phase, it mandates me to start from a CR step, right? It's a change. So I'm asking it to change. So I just say, why do you want to change or add to the scope which is not there in the scoping phase? So I have justified. So let me add some justification. Let's say it is a simple one, new direct store delivery process. Again, a customer request and then proceed. So if you see now, when I try to add a process, it has to be mandatorily under a particular CR. What was it called? Direct store order or something. I create under it. Now a new process line item gets added, but it's with a change request. I can do the same thing with it, capture more details, etc., so on and so forth. So in the interest of time, I would move on. One of the first and most important automation here is now that I've captured all these inputs, I can generate a process document out of it by clicking on this button, which based on a specific template that I may have embedded or created or which is configurable, it generates a document, something like this. Let's say it's a BPD for buying, and it looks something like this, right? The process document which captures these were the, if you remember, the processes that were listed. Each such process, for example, in the main standard ordering, if you remember, we had added variant called import buying. So it captures the information of the process steps that we had mentioned, each process step explained with its prerequisites, inputs, requirements, outputs. If you remember, in the release order, we had made a change of 150 here. So in changes, whatever information we capture, and on the transmit, we had assigned a gap to it saying customization, for example, of a creation of a new form, etc. So it creates a beautiful document based on a specific template and the information I captured. So it's first level of automation on this particular process of business process documentation, right? So one other feature which maybe needed to be explained at this time, if you remember, we had added a couple of change requests. So there is a monitor that's available at centrally with, let's say, an architect or a project manager who gets to see each of these. Let us say he wants to talk about visualize one of those. He sees, looks at these documents. He can generate a CR document out of it, which basically again reads a particular template embedded in the tool and generate a CR document, um, CR1, which will look something like this, based on a specific template with some information that he might want to submit this to the let's say it has an impact on some dollars, etc. Submit to the customer, get their approval, and then go back to CR monitor and say this is approved, accepted. Let's say there is no impact on the in either of those dollar wise. It's approved by, say, customer CIO, right? It's an accept status. So that's how change requests, management of changes to what scope was agreed to what is being delivered is streamlined significantly. All right. So so this is how the explore phase or the design phase continues, where the consultant and leads sitting with the customer identify and conclude on the design that is required for this particular customer